Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Rudomin, and today is a special broadcast. We would like to, first of all, wish everybody a Chag Shavuot Sameach, a happy Passover. And since that is the holiday that is upcoming, I wanted to share with you some general themes that I have picked up and treasured over the years, and I'd like to share them with you, just a general overview of various Passover themes. So the first thing I'd like to just mention is that Passover is one of three festivals called Shalosh Regalim, literally three legs or three pilgrim festivals, when Jews were commanded by God in the Torah, when they lived in the land of Israel, to go up to the temple and celebrate the holiday. So Passover is one of them. The other one is Sukkut, Tabernacles, and the other one is Shavuot. Shavuot is 50 days, 50 days after Passover. So a lot of the people would stay over from Passover, from Pesach, until Shavuot, because there is a connection over there. Now, Passover, Pesach, is called Zman Cheruseinu. In the prayer books, it's called the time of our freedom, when the Jewish people obtained their national freedom. It's sort of the July 4th or the National Independence Day of the Jewish people, when they received their liberty from bondage in the ancient Egyptian empire, which was the world's greatest empire in ancient times. So that's what Passover is. It's in the prayer books, it's referred to as Man Cheruseinu, a time of liberty. And it's interesting to see how the various rituals and mitzvahs of the day are designed to bring out this sense of liberty and freedom within every Jew as they celebrate the Seder, for example, which is the festive meal that's held at night of Passover. In Israel, it's held only one time, one day, whereas outside of Israel, we have Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galuyot, we have the second day of the exiles. So in a certain way, we are blessed. We have a second day outside of Israel to celebrate Passover. So therefore, most people, certainly Orthodox people, observant people, keep 2 days and observe two Seders. Seder means order. It's an organized meal. Then there are special prayers. And of course, the Haggadah, the book that is said during the Seder, and that maps out the Seder. And then the special foods that we have. And there are then the final days of Passover, which celebrates the splitting of the Red Sea. It took them a week to get from Egypt to the shore of the sea, and then the sea split for them on the seventh day. So that's one idea. It's called Zman Cheruseinu. Another idea is the idea of a nation from within a nation. The Jewish people, the Israelites, were born just as, so to speak, a fetus is born, a newborn is born from the womb of its mother. So likewise, the Jewish people were born from the womb of Egypt. Egypt is called the Kur HaBarzel, the furnace of fire. But the idea is Goy Mikerev Goy, a nation from within a nation. That's how the Jewish nation was born. If you ask yourself, how's a human being born, right? We don't drop from the sky. We don't just suddenly get together and have a vote and say, okay, let there be baby. It doesn't work that way. A human being is born from another human being. That's the way birth on this planet takes place. And it's not just human beings. All mammals are like that. The reptiles, the fish, Insects lay eggs, so that's something else. But generally, mammals and fish and reptiles and human beings, Homo sapiens, that's how they are born. That's how they are. That's the order of creation of life on this planet. So likewise, similarly, and it's logical, how is the Jewish people born? From within another nation. And that nation happened to be Egypt, Mitzrayim. And the word Mitzrayim comes from the word Metzer, Tsar, narrowness, because that's like the birth canal, for example. Baby has to pass through a narrow birth canal to be born. Likewise, the Jewish people, the children of Israel, had to pass through a narrow birth canal through the sea to be born, splitting of a sea. In fact, when a baby is born, the water breaks, right? And likewise, when the children of Israel had to pass through the sea broke, unnatural. And the Jewish people, the children of Israel, went through to the other side, and then the water collapsed on the chasing Egyptians. And also this idea of Kur HaBarzel, that Egypt was a Kur HaBarzel. If you think about it, a boiling furnace, how is metal forged? How is metal made? When you want to create a gold bar, right? What do? You put golden ore. It's like rocks and dirt that's subjected to intense heat. And then, the dross falls away and the gold comes out. So it's likewise with the children of Israel. The Torah says only 1/5, chamushim alu, only 1/5 of the Jewish people came out of the children of Israel. That's quite a scary thought. Only 1/5. 4/5 of the Israelites died in the plague of darkness. Reason they died in the plague of darkness is because God did not want to humiliate the children of Israel so that the Egyptians would see them dying. So they died during the plague of darkness, and only 1/5 came out. So that's a Kur HaBarzel. That's similar to a purification process. When you want to create ore or you want to create gold, you have to throw the ore, the golden the stuff, into a huge burning furnace, which then separates the dross from the pure stuff. And out comes the molten, if it happens to be gold or steel, whatever the metal is that's being produced. So that is the idea of Kur HaBarzel, a burning furnace that the children of Israel found themselves in ancient Egypt. So that's another comparison. Excuse me. Now, they were in Egypt only 210 years, because the 400 years is counted from the time that Isaac is born. This is based on the promise, the prophecy that was given to Abraham at the time of when he had the Bris Ben Habesarim, the covenant of the parts. God said to him, your seed that will be born from you will be a stranger in a nation that they do not know for 400 years. So it's interpreted that when does Abraham start becoming a nation? When he has his first son, Isaac. His first Israelite son through Sarah, whose name is Isaac, Yitzchak. So the exile really starts, the Egyptian exile starts from the time that Isaac is born till the time of the actual Exodus, so that's 400 years. But the amount of time that the children of Israel were actually in Egypt is 210 years. Now I say it's only, but 210 years is a long time. It's many generations. But that's how long they were enslaved in Egypt. Now, the commentators say that the Jewish people reached 49 levels of Tumah, Mem Tes Share Tumah. There is this concept of Mem Tes Share Kedusha and Mem Tes Share Tumah. 49 levels of impurity and 49 levels of purity. That's the way it's designed. And then the 50th level of impurity is destruction, there's nothingness. And the 50th level of purity is the height of, like, for example, the children of Israel, when they reached the level of being worthy of receiving the Torah. So the children of Israel had actually reached the 49th level of impurity in Egypt. So things were pretty bad. By the way, this excludes the Levites. The Levites were not put into bondage. But the rest of the children of Israel had reached that level of impurity. And Egypt is considered to be the most immoral of lands. You know, God had really put the children of Israel to a great test when he put them into that exile, because it says of 10 portions of immorality that came down to the world, the Egyptians took 9/10. They were very immoral, corrupt people. So the children of Israel, unfortunately, were very much influenced to some or other degree, that they themselves sank to the 49th level of impurity. And that is why it says that God himself came down to redeem them out of Egypt. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'kvodo v'atzmai, God himself came down. It wasn't, we say this in the Haggadah, not by means of any angel or celestial being, that it was God himself who came down to save the Jewish people in Egypt, because they say, had an angel come down to Egypt to try to save the Jews, even an angel would have been corrupted. Even an angel would have been destroyed by the level of impurity that was existent in Egypt at the time, right before the Exodus. So, and then, of course, they're saved. They do not reach that 50th level of impurity, and they go out, and instead, the day after Passover, the Torah says, start a count of 49 levels. Count the days. So it's actually 40, it's called Sefira HaOmer, the counting of the Omer harvest, when the first harvest was brought, because Passover occurs in the spring. It's actually also called Chag HaAviv, the spring festival. And that's when the early harvest begins. And barley is one of the first crops to start ripening in the fields. So the Torah commanded, God commanded, count the days of the first crops. But there's also a deeper meaning of count the days of your spiritual rectification, of reaching a level where after the 49th day, the Jewish people will be on a level to receive the Torah. That's Shavuot. The festival of, in English it's called Pentecost, and in Hebrew it's called Shavuot, which means weeks, because there are 7 weeks. Count the days, count the weeks. So it's 7 times 7, 7 weeks, 7 days each. So it's 7 weeks plus 7 days. So it's 7 sets of 7. 7 sevens are 49, 49th level of purity they reached. And then the 50th, the umpteenth level. I had this theory, I don't know, just as an aside, of where the notion of percentages comes from. Like, who made the idea of percentages being 100%? Or even in Celsius, you go from 1 degree to 100 degrees. 0 is freezing, 100 is boiling, I believe. But then we have 100 degrees as a concept. So many years ago, I thought of the idea, and I wrote an essay about this, that perhaps it's taken from this idea of there are 49 levels of impurity. So you climb the 49 levels of impurity, then you get to the middle, and then the 50th, and then you start the next climb. So 50 plus 50 is 100. It's based on this two, because we know 50 is 50%, is half. So in some cases, when in marking systems, the minimal that they will allow you as a pass is 50. In some cases, of course, standards have been raised, and then there's 80 and 90 for a pass. But in some places, they still have the olden day system of 50%. If you get 50 and above, it's a pass. So maybe that's where the idea of percentages come from. But that's just a thought and aside of trying to understand these 49 levels of impurity versus the 49 levels of purity. And then the 50th level of impurity is complete destruction, whereas the 50th level of purity is complete purity. Okay. So now, coming to the 10 plagues, okay? We know that the Egyptians were struck by 10 plagues, or were afflicted by God. God sends Moses and Aaron, and he warns Pharaoh and the Egyptians that plagues are coming. And in the end, there are 10 plagues. The worst plague, of course, was the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. But I want to focus on this number of 10, because 10 is significant in Judaism. And we see the number 10 in the Torah as well, because in creation, there is the concept of Ba'asara ma'amares nivra ha'olam, that the world was created through 10 expressions. God uttered 10 expressions, so to speak, that created the world. So that's the world of nature. The world as we know it, the world of nature, or the way of the world as it was known, certainly before Noah, or before Abraham, or before even the Exodus, there was a world based on 10 expressions of creation that God himself used to create the natural order. Whereas the 10 plagues, each one breaks down the natural order of creation and destroys it, regurgitates it. And then in its place, as the Jewish people move towards Sinai, come a world based on the 10 commandments, on moral law, that the world is not just based on natural law, laws of physics and mathematics and science, that it's not just based on the observable facts of nature, but the world also has a moral dimension, and there is a moral code, and it's also based on the 10 commandments, the first one of which is to believe in God. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I'm the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. That's what God tells the children of Israel. So again, it's 10 expressions of creation, Ba'asara ma'amaros nivra ha'olam, with 10 expressions, the world was created. Then you have Eser Makos, that God struck the Egyptians. It means the civilized world at that time, so-called civilized world, was struck by 10 plagues and broken down. So the world of nature itself was broken down. Frogs, lice, blood, wild animals, hail from the sky, all these things. If you think about it, it's all a breakdown in nature. It's like the normal rules of nature just go haywire. There's no order anymore. Everything is broken down, right? And then finally, where is all that headed? It's headed to the 10 commandments. The giving of the 10 commandments, when God expresses the 10 commandments and then writes down the 10 commandments. So that's the centrality of moral law, all moral law. You want to call it the Judeo-Christian tradition. You want to call it biblical values. But when you talk of morality, it's not just some random well, do what's nice. Do the good thing. Be nice. No, morality is not just about being nice. Morality also has rules. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not covet. Thou shalt honor your father and mother. Keep the Sabbath. Worshiping God, right? There are rules to morality. And those rules are encased in the number 10. So it's 10, 10, 10. Okay, so that's that idea. Let's move on. There is a discussion among some of the rabbis of the relationship between the Shalosh Regalim. Remember I said there are 3 pilgrim festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, right? Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. So what's the relationship between these three? So first of all, we'll mention in a minute, first of all, there's a exactly 6 month gap between Passover and Sukkot. Passover is on the 15th day of the Hebrew month of Nisan, and Sukkot is on the 15th day of the Hebrew month of Tishrei. So that's exactly 6 months apart on the Hebrew calendar. They're exactly split. It's they sort of mirror images of each other. So now starting with Passover, Pesach. Pesach, we receive the Israelites and the Jewish people celebrate the physical freedom. They were literally freed. Their chains were broken, and their bondage was removed, and they were set free, literally set free on the simplest, most basic physical level, right? Now, what about preserving that freedom? That's something else. You can be set free, but what are you going to make of your freedom? Is your freedom guaranteed? So that's where Sukkot fits in, Tabernacles. Because God said when they came out of Egypt, they dwelt in booths, in tabernacles, in Sukkot, in little huts. Some say it was the divine Shechina, Ananei Kavod, that there were clouds of glory that covered them. But the concept is that they were a nation of a couple of million of people that had gone through the exodus from Egypt and were now in the wilderness of Sinai, the desert of Sinai. And where did they have to live somewhere? So they lived in these booths. They made little huts, you could say tents. And on top of them was the Ananei Kavod, the clouds of glory that God himself protected them. They were ensconced in these spiritual clouds of glory. And so we celebrate this when we sit in a booth, a hut, and instead of having clouds of glory, we put cut branches from trees or bamboo, cut from bamboo shoots and put on the roof. And that's the covering. And then when we look up at the bamboo and the branches, it's as if we're looking at the clouds of glory. We're supposed to remind ourselves that when God took the children of Israel out of Egypt, that he protected them with clouds of glory. So again, Passover is the time of the physical liberation of the Jewish people, of the children of Israel, right, of the Israelites. And Sukkot is the preservation of that physical freedom, that God, ki hoshafti etchem, because I had you dwell in these booths. So God, so to speak, encompassed and encased and embraced the children of Israel, protecting them from the elements and from their enemies whilst they were in the wilderness of Sinai, right? So Pesach is freedom. Sukkot is the guarantee of that freedom, the preservation of that freedom. Now, after Passover comes another holiday. 49 days later comes Shavuot. Whereas Sukkot is 6 months after Passover, Shavuot is 7 weeks. It's exactly always 7 weeks. Count 49 days of the day after Passover, starting at night, and then the 50th day will be Shavuot. We don't count the 50. We only count as far as 49, the Torah says. But there are 49 days culminating in the 50th day from the beginning of Passover till Shavuot, till Pentecost. And Pentecost, I believe, means also the day of the 50th celebration, of celebrating the 50th day. It's a Greek word. I'm not familiar with Greek. So what happens on Shavuot? The Jewish people, the children of Israel, receive the Torah. God reveals himself at Mount Sinai. He says the 10 commandments, that's called the Decalogue, and he gives them the 10 commandments. Moses then goes up to Mount Sinai, for 40 days, and then another 40 days. In the end, he lands up being up there for 128 days. 120 days. But on Shavuot, so to speak, we receive our spiritual freedom. We enter into a covenant with God. God comes down to Mount Sinai. The children of Israel, assemble at the foot of the mountain, at the foot of Mount Sinai. And then Moses goes up as the emissary of the Jewish people. And God then reveals himself and declares the 10 Commandments. So what is that? We become different. We're spiritualized. In fact, they say when the children of Israel heard God exclaim the first of the 10 Commandments, they all died, and then God had to resuscitate them. And then they died a second time, and God resuscitated them again. And then they said, no, please, we can't take this anymore. Please, Moses, go up. Now, this is not in the Torah. This is in the Midrashic commentaries. But it's universally accepted by traditional Jews. And so on Shavuot, they receive their spiritual freedom. They become a spiritual nation. They become a Torah nation. From that point on, they are obligated to keep the commandments as they are given to them, because it will be a period of 40 years eventually from the time of Shavuot, the first Shavuot, the first time God revealed himself at Mount Sinai, till they enter the land of Israel. 40 years later, God will be instructing Moses as to what are the commandments, the mitzvot. But at Mount Sinai, they already received 10. And for example, on Shavuot, there's a custom to eat dairy because that's when the laws of kashrut came about. So who knows what they were eating before. So if you're suddenly in a situation where you don't know what to eat and all you can eat is something that's kosher, so dairy, pure milk from a cow. I'm not talking about if it has additives, but pure dairy, pure cheese, pure milk, pure butter, right? Is something it's pure. It's Chalav Yisrael. If a Jew milked the cow, if a Jew made the butter, if a Jew produces the milk and the cheese, it's kosher. So we have a custom to eat dairy food, something, some cheesecake, or something that comes from the world of the cow's dairy production. Okay, so that's because on Shavuot we became kosher, so we had to start keeping kosher. We didn't know all the rules of kosher. We were slaves in Egypt for so many years. Now God is telling us, don't eat this, don't eat that, keep this, keep that. So what do you do? So the first thing you do is you get rid of all your pots which are not kosher, and you start eating that which is kosher, and what's available is dairy, usually the simplest food. Also, there's another analogy. The Jewish people are a baby nation. They're just born. So what does a baby eat when it's just born? Milk, right? Mother's milk or other kinds of milk they give a baby. So that's another symbolism of the milk on Shavuot. But now, similar to the question of when Passover gives you your physical freedom, and then Sukkot guarantees your physical freedom. So now Shavuot gives you your spiritual freedom. But what festival parallels the preservation, the guarantee of your spiritual freedom? You can become spiritually turned on. Many people get a high, they go somewhere, they go to a weekend, a Shabbaton as it's called, a Sabbath weekend, or people go to a meeting of some spiritual pastor or something, in all kinds of religions that people get turned on, but then you meet them a week later or a month later, a year later, or they're back to their same old selves. Hey, what happened? You were on such a high. I saw you there. You were dancing and singing and praising the Lord, and now you're back to just like being an ordinary Joe Schmo. What's going on? So that's the point. Spiritual freedom, just like physical freedom, needs a guarantee and it needs to be preserved. And the holiday that does that is the end of Sukkot, is another holiday. It's called Shmini Atzeret. There is a holiday that's latched on to the very end. It's called Shmini Atzeret, the 8th day of assembly, because 7 days they had Sukkot. And then the 8th day of assembly, Shmini Atzeret, is a separate festival. and it comes right after Sukkot, right after you've been celebrating the preservation and the guarantee of your physical freedom. You have a holiday which celebrates the preservation and guarantees your spiritual freedom. And how do we do that? How did the sages set up that holiday? What is a guarantee for spiritual freedom? Torah, we rejoice with the Torah. Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres in Israel, Shmini Atzeres and Simchat Torah, Simchas Torah go together. Outside of Israel, it's 2 days. So the Torah is the guarantee for spiritual freedom. If you study the Torah, you observe the Torah, you keep the Torah, you treasure the Torah is a holy book to you, that will guarantee the survival of your spiritual freedom. If your children see this and your family members see this, you will influence them. That's how it gets handed down from generation to generation. And that's how you influence. If you I used to teach classes in Torah to adults who didn't have much of a Jewish background. And I remember one of the students would say to us, Rabbi, just remember, when you're talking to us, you're talking to more than one person, because we have spouses, we have children, we have family, we have friends. And if we get influenced for the good, we will influence our spouses, our children, our family, and our friends. So it's not just, if you are observing the Torah, it's not just handing it down through the ages or keeping yourself spiritually alive. Your neighbors will be influenced, your friends, your family, all those around you, your co-workers will be influenced and will see that the Torah has value because you give it value. Okay? So that's the idea of the physical preservation and the physical freedom versus the physical preservation, spiritual freedom versus the spiritual preservation. Now, there is, as I mentioned, the concept of the Sefira. Before I talk about Sefira, I just want to mention there is an unusual thing in Passover and Sukkot, is that we have a half holiday. In other words, the Torah says you should keep the first day of Sukkot as a holiday and the seventh day, the last day. So you observe the first day as a holiday and the last day as a holiday. The days in between are called Chol HaMoed, literally secular holiday. Chol means profane, not profane, but ordinary. And Moed means holiday. So it's ordinary and holiday mixed together, Chol HaMoed. So it's a festival or not quite festival. In other words, you're allowed to do activities of work. You're allowed to do what's called malacha. Malacha means certain forbidden activities of work. Let's say, for example, on Shabbat, you're not allowed to turn on lights, you're not allowed to drive your car, you're not allowed to turn on light a fire, and things like that, right? I'm not going into it now. So similarly, a lot of those apply on Yontif, which is not on Shabbos. If it's on Shabbos, then it applies. If it's not on Shabbat, if Yontif is not on Shabbat, then you are allowed to do certain things that have to do with cooking. If there's a fire lit already, you're allowed to cook food on that fire. And if you don't have enough food, you can go so far as to slaughter a chicken if you need it for that Yontif. But that's not really done. Today we have refrigeration, and people can have meat prepared in their refrigerators and just take out meat that they've bought and cook it. But these are called malachas, acts of work that are forbidden to be done on the actual holiday itself. But on Chol HaMoed, there's no restriction. But what people do is they try to dress a little bit better on Chol HaMoed. They like, let's say, Hasidic people, the men will still wear their streimels, as a sign of the holiday still being on the go. And to try to have more than normal festive meals. And then, of course, the last day of Passover is a holiday as well. So there's about 4, 5, 6 days. I mean, it varies from year to year of how many days Chol HaMoed there are. There's usually a Shabbat in the middle. So you have to look at your Jewish calendar to figure out how many days of Chol HaMoed there are, of this intermediate, they're called the intermediate days. Now, as a springboard, I mentioned this as a springboard to the discussion of there's a connection between Passover and Shavuot, obviously, because they came out of Egypt on Passover, on Pesach. Then they headed, because God says, let my people go so that they may serve me. Shlach ami v'ya'avduni. Shlach es ami v'ya'avduni. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that Passover was just freedom, Jolly Roger freedom. You're going to run around and do what you want. No, be free so that you may serve God. So on Passover, we receive our freedom. And then from there, we head to Mount Sinai. And on Mount Sinai, we receive the Torah, and that's Shavuot. In between, we count weeks, days and weeks, the 49 days of the Omer. So that is considered to be like a long type of Chol HaMoed. It's a long connection. A lot of people forget this with very, very serious consequences. Because you see, the purpose of the Exodus is to turn the Jewish people into a Torah nation. What else? What's the definition of the Jewish people? They are good at making money? Okay. But when they can't make money, they're good at being poor and being schnorrers? Okay. They are good at comedy? No, well, you can go through a whole list of things. But the bottom line is, and it should be very, very clear, the purpose of the Jewish people is to be a Torah nation. Studying Torah, learning Torah, observing the Torah is their national objective, not just pastime like a hobby. This is the mission of the Jewish people, to be a Torah nation, to be an Am Hashem, a nation of God. How are you a nation of God? All humanity, every nation is a nation of God. Which nation is not a nation of God? We're all under God, all of humanity. But the unique and special mission of the Jewish people is to be a Torah nation. So now, since that is so, from Passover till Shavuot, one has to take extra special care in not of honoring the Torah. And that is why the Sefira, what's known as the Sefira, Sfirat HaOmer, the days between, it starts the day after Passover, but there is a serious time to it from right after Passover ends till either the 33rd day of the Omer, the Lag BaOmer, it's called Lag BaOmer, 33rd day of the Omer, or Shavuot, where tragedy has befallen the Jewish people. It's become a time of mourning. Now, really, it should not have been a time of mourning. It should have been a time of rejoicing, of greater spiritual awareness and greater spiritual preparation of every Jew, of every Israelite, from the time of Passover and the Exodus till the receiving of the Torah. I mean, it's like a bride. It's considered like a marriage. They exited Egypt. They were born. Okay, so it's a quick process from birth to marriage. But that's what it was. The analogy of Passover is birth, being born as a Jewish nation. The analogy of Shavuot is marriage to God. It's standing under the canopy. So it's a quick jump. And it's also getting rid of the 49 levels of impurity. So it's like a bride getting married, getting ready for her marriage day. It's like getting ready for the finals, getting ready for the arrival of a great visitor. Oh, the president's coming to town. Well, today people hate the president, so I don't know if that counts. But, half the nation, half of America loves their president, half hates, depends who you support. But imagine somebody notable. There's so much expectation. Same thing, God is coming on Mount Sinai. Get ready. We're headed to receive the Torah. So Jews should be extra careful. So now there was death. They say the students of Rabbi Akiva died during the first 33 days of the Sefira. And the death ended on Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer. Now, what is that about? So the sages say, the Jewish sages say, because Shelo negu kavod zelazeh, because they didn't honor each other. They were Torah sages. It says 24,000 of Rabbi Akiva's students died. Can you imagine? 24,000 scholars who are students of Rabbi Akiva, the greatest of the oral law sages, died. Some say they died from a plague. Some say they died because they joined in the Bar Kokhba rebellion. There was a big rebellion against the Romans at that time. That was also going on in the times of Rabbi Akiva. But either way, the reason is given, their death is attributed to the fact that as Torah scholars, they should have known better, and they should have honored each other, given honor to each other, because this was a special time between Passover and Shavuot. Oh, could be they forgot, they were distracted, there were wars, whatever it is. You have to be more than careful during this time. Spiritualize yourself. That's why, for example, some people have a custom to eat matzah every Shabbat. Every Shabbat, to eat a little bit of matzah every Shabbat between the end of Pesach and the arrival of Shavuot. Just a bit of matzah, just to remind you that you are still in a long Chol HaMoed. There is a connector, the 49 days that connect the beginning of Passover with the arrival of Shavuot is a long Chol HaMoed. And you need to appreciate, be sensitive to what's in the atmosphere that requires greater sensitivity to godliness and to honoring Torah, studying Torah, being more sensitive to Torah, whatever it takes to put the Torah on a higher level so you don't forget yourself. And then there's mystical interpretations. I'm not going into that. Of each day of the Omer is a different level in the mystical domains, but I'm not too familiar with that, and I didn't prepare on that, so I'm not going to talk about that. Let's move on. We did mention that there is exactly a 6-month difference between Passover and Sukkot, and it's discussed in the oral law, in the rabbinical commentaries of the meaning of this. That also one of the first stops when the children of Israel come out of Egypt is actually called Sukkot. They go to a place. There's actually a place, but symbolically it symbolizes that they went to that place that was called Sukkot, meaning that they embraced, that they entered into the idea of Sukkot. But it's important to be aware of this dichotomy between Passover and Sukkot being mirror image reflections of each other, being set up in such a way that each one is exactly 6 months apart from each other. And there's also a name for Gzera Shava Tezvav. There's a way of learning out similarities by the fact that each one comes out to be on the 15th day of each respective month. Passover on the 15th of Nisan and Sukkot on the 15th of Tishrei, and to see that both a dichotomy and a connectedness between the two. Some people even have a custom to eat a little bit of matzah when they're sitting in the sukkah as a remembrance of Passover. There's not much we can do on Passover, just to be aware of it. Unlike Sukkot, on Sukkot we have a custom of ushpizin, that each day symbolically another guest comes. So the first day Abraham, Avram, second day Yitzchak, third day Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, day by day. Moses, Aaron, Joseph, David. And then on Passover, we don't have this idea of guests coming. The closest thing we have to it is at the Seders, we set out a special cup of wine, a fifth cup of wine, because 4 cups of the wine are drunk. We set up a special cup for Eliyahu Hanavi, that we supposedly, according to tradition, and that's why at a certain point in the Seder, we open the door, the front door, and we stand up and we welcome Eliyahu Hanavi. We welcome Elijah the prophet. The idea with Elijah the prophet is he was actually a man who did not die physically. He was so it's called a kanai. He was so jealous for the honor of God that he went up to heaven in a chariot of fire. And so therefore he's also called Eliyahu Malach Habris. He comes to visit on Passover. He comes to visit at he's the angel of circumcision. And he's also the special agent. Like, you have the special agent 007 who does everything, can do any special mission that's required on behalf of Her Majesty's government or His Majesty's government, whoever the reigning monarch is of Britain. So likewise, we have Eliyahu Navi. He is the most special of emissaries of God. And because he did not die in the physical sense, he's one of the few people who actually went up to heaven alive. So he's able to transverse the spiritual and the physical domains. He's able to go from upstairs to downstairs with ease because he's neither physical nor spiritual, right? He went from the physical to the spiritual, so therefore he can go from the spiritual to the physical, and sometimes he can appear as a beggar or as a special person. There's people who've sworn, that they witnessed. It's called Gilu Eliyahu. Well, Gilu Eliyahu is something else. That they've witnessed as somebody came to save them. Then there is actually the concept of Gilu Eliyahu, when certain scholars, rabbis, learn Kabbalah and they learn the esoteric wisdom of the Torah. There's a concept called the Gilu Eliyahu, that Elijah comes and reveals himself to that person, and they start hearing voices. Not certifiably, but spiritually speaking, Eliyahu Hanavi, it's called Gilu Eliyahu, the revelation of Elijah. It's a stage in Torah learning where one reaches a very high spiritual level, that the next level of Torah that has to be revealed can only be revealed through the arrival of Eliyahu, a special revelation that he brings. Okay, so Eliyahu Hanavi is the guest that we have on the first, and outside of Israel, we have the second night of Yom Tov. And the last days of Yom Tov, the last meal of Yom Tov, is also connected to this idea. They say it's the Seudah of Mashiach. It's the meal of the Mashiach, meaning the redemption. Because the last day of Passover, meaning in Israel, to be the 7th day. Outside of Israel becomes the 8th day. So in Hebrew we call it Shvi Shal Pesach and Acharon Shal Pesach. So the 7th day of Passover is a holiday outside of Israel. And then the 8th day, Acharon, it's called the last day of Passover. The last meal is called the meal of Mashiach, of the Messiah. So Dasa Shal Mashiach. And a lot of the great rabbis, especially the Hasidic rabbis, like to make a special meal, and they eat matzah, and they drink some wine, and they say words of Torah, and they talk about the prophecies, about the redemption, about the end of time, because that was the time of Kriyas Yam Suf. That's the celebration of the splitting of the Red Sea when the Jewish people were saved. So to speak, that is a symbol of when the Jewish people will be saved, when the Mashiach comes, when the Jewish Messiah comes. So the world will be saved. It's like a kind of splitting of a sea, a new world order will arrive. Okay. I'd like to end off with a discussion of the word Pesach. This is not my idea. This is in Jewish sources. I'm just giving you a summary of the themes. Pesach, they say, comes down to 2 words. Pesach. Pesach. Pe is a mouth. Pe. Sach, sicha, means discussion, speech. So Pesach means the mouth that talks. And if you'll see, Passover really, a lot of the holiday revolves around the mouth. Like if you want to focus yourself, because there's so many things happening, guests arriving, cooking, setting up, you say the Haggadah, but sometimes you need a focal point. So I'm giving you a focal point. A focal point is the mouth. Focus on your mouth. For example, we say the Haggadah. There is a Haggadah. Haggadah means saying, lahagid, to say over. That's said by the mouth. Everybody says the Haggadah. We sing the Hallel. There is singing of the Hallel prayer. It's part of the Haggadah, right? We drink 4 cups of wine. If you can't manage wine, drink grape juice. Has to be kosher wine, not just any old wine. Kosher wine, kosher grape juice. It's not too late. You can still go out and get yourself some. And so we drink the 4 cups of wine. Then we eat matzah. Again, through the mouth, you eat matzah. People eat hand shmura matzah, machine-made matzah, whatever your custom is. We eat matzah, right? We eat maror. We eat the bitter herbs. The bitter vegetables. We do not eat chametz. We do not eat leaven, that which is like bread or cookies or cake or macaroni or spaghetti or anything that does not have a kosher for Passover sign, right? We don't, Ashkenazi Jews, European Jews don't eat beans and lentils and rice. Sephardic Jews eat kitniyot. They eat beans, lentils, and rice. And in ancient times, of course, the main part of the sacrifice was eating. They would go to Jerusalem and they would eat the Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach means the sacrificial offering that the Torah commands every Jew, every man, woman, and child had to go up and eat it's called the Paschal lamb. They would take a lamb or a sheep or a goat, roast it, of course, slaughter it, and then roast it. If you roast meat, you don't have to kosher it, believe it or not. Roast it over an open fire. So they would eat, it was like a barbecue. And it had to be a portion so that there should be no leftovers. It's called nosar. It's like in the sacrificial offerings. A lot of them are not, you're not allowed to have things that are left over. Everything has to be consumed on the night of the holiday. So they had to apportion, you had to count. Let's say there were 10 people in your family, so you would need 1.5 sheep. And you'd have to work out with your friend or your neighbor or whoever was there next to you in Jerusalem. Well, who's going to share with me this half a sheep? So you'd have to share it because none of it was allowed to be left over. And they would eat it roasted, slice it, slice it, and eat it with maror, bitter herbs, a bit of vegetable. Could be anything, parsley, lettuce, romaine lettuce, onion, I don't know, celery. Different people have different customs. Some kind of green vegetable. It has to be a green vegetable. And then with matzah, they would eat. So they would eat the Korban Pesach, they would eat the bitter herbs, and they would eat the matzah. And then there's discussion how they would eat it. Would they eat like a bit of meat, take a bite of meat, take a bite of the bitter herb, take a bite of matzah? Or there's an opinion that says it's in the Haggadah. They would make a sandwich. They would put the meat and the bitter herb in the middle of matzah and eat it like a sandwich. So either eat it as a sandwich or eat it piecemeal. But that was they didn't have the custom of drinking wine. That was instituted later by the rabbis for 4 expressions of salvation that are mentioned in the Haggadah. But the main mitzvah of Passover was to come up to Jerusalem in the times of the temples. Remember, each temple stood for 400 years. Then they had the tabernacle before that. Then they had altars before they built the first temple. But each person would be obligated to eat a Passover offering. Now, since we don't have the Jewish temple, right? And we can't go to Jerusalem. I mean, you can go to a hotel, or if you have an apartment there, but you'll still be doing a regular Passover. You won't be roasting a lamb because there's no temple, right? So we do not eat any roasted meat on Passover night. No roast chicken, no roast lamb. That's why people have corned beef, something boiled or stewed, right? Something that's cooked, because you're not supposed to have anything roasted, so it should not appear as if you are eating or celebrating the Paschal lamb outside of Jerusalem, or the Passover offering outside of Jerusalem. You're not allowed to do that. The Passover meal is only supposed to be eaten in Jerusalem. So again, Pesach, the mouth speaks. The mouth speaks. And then there is also a custom, not everybody has this is only very, very devout people do this. They say the Song of Songs, because each of the holidays has a special scroll. So on Passover, we recite Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, right? And in the Song of Songs, it says, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. It talks about somebody kissing somebody with the kisses of his mouth. Now, this is a metaphor for the relationship between God and the Jewish people, entering into a close relationship starting from Passover. That the Jewish people, the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, become close with God. So that is one of the reasons we recite. And again, not everybody, this is very, if you're really serious about this, people say, right when they finish the Haggadah, they finish the Seder, everything is over, they sit back, pull out a toothpick maybe, and then they start on Shir HaShirim. So sometimes that's why Seder can go on till like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning or whenever. Some people can say it speedily, and they say it in Hebrew. So again, what I'm saying is the focus is on the mouth in terms of a motif, of a metaphor of kissing. How do you kiss? You kiss with your mouth. So again, the mouth is the focus, Pesach. So saying the greatest attribute of the mouth is its ability of speech. That is when, for example, man comes to life. When God created Adam and Eve, when did they come to life? When did Adam come to life? When it says "Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim," that God breathed into the nostrils of man the soul of life, and then it says that man went and came to life. And the Onkelos translation says it was a nefesh memalala, a speaking soul. That was the definition of man, differentiating him from all other creatures in nature. Sure, creatures in nature make noises, they crow, they bark, they roar, they this, they that, they squeak, they squeal, but there's no such thing as a power of speech. Even a parrot can say a couple of words, but it's not speaking. It's just parroting. So the idea of speech is that this is the highest point, the embodiment of man, of Adam. And the Jewish people on Passover, so to speak, they are becoming the embodiment of the Adam. On the corporate level, on the level of 600,000 males above the age of 20, plus their family members. That's when they're born. And from that time on, there is always a Jewish nation of 600,000 males and, children and elders and females. So it's always a few million people. But the minimum is 600,000 males. Shishim ribui, 600,000. That also happens on Passover. So we've covered a lot of important points. I've given you some things to focus on. And it's not too late. You can still read up on the festival. People like to, sometimes there's people like to have a few Haggadahs with different interpretations. There's always new interpretations and new commentaries. But the idea is also, don't forget, the bottom line is you've got to enjoy Yontif. You've got to enjoy the holiday. Because it says, V'samachta bechagecha, you should rejoice on your holidays. And incidentally, it also says, Ein simcha ela bebasa b'yayin. There's no joy except through meat and wine. So enjoy your meat and wine, enjoy the holiday, and just be in a good spirit. Try not to be angry. Try not to be in any other mood. Remember that the time between Passover and Shavuot is an important time. And just a quick word about Lag BaOmer, maybe. Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, 33rd day counting from the beginning of Passover, when the plague of Rabbi Akiva's students dying stopped. What was that about? The plague stopped, and they say on that day, there was a great revelation of Torah yet again, of the Zohar, of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who hid in a cave for, 14 years? He came out of the cave, and he was studying the Torah with his son, and out came a new dimension of Torah, the oral law of the Kabbalah, of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, of the Torah's Hanister. So that becomes a time of rejoicing, and there's a custom in Israel and in many other places to make bonfires as a sign of light, because the Torah is compared to light. Okay, so I will wish you Chag Sameach, good Yontif. Thank you very much, and hopefully we will return to some more videos in the future. Thank you. Shalom.